Olá, pessoal. Estamos hoje aqui nessa nova temporada do Bora Falar de Branding e hoje, pela primeira vez, uma presença internacional. Nós vamos conversar hoje com o professor, o escritor e, acima de tudo, o estudioso sobre branding, Tim Calkins. Tim Calkins é da Kellogg School of Management dos Estados Unidos e é um dos grandes autores, junto com Keller, junto com Acker, sobre a questão de branding. Então, hoje nós temos uma belíssima oportunidade para conversar em alto estilo sobre questões relevantes do branding atual. Tá bom? Espero que você curta bastante. Já entraremos com o professor Calkins aqui. Esperamos que você curta bastante, acima de tudo, essa imensa oportunidade que a gente está tendo de trocar visões, experiências, conceitos com um professor, com um estudioso internacional. Até já. Okay. People, today we are very proud to have the presence of Mr. Tim Calkins. Mr. Tim Calkins, Associate Chair of the Marketing Department, Kellogg School of Management. Before anything, Mr. Calkins, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your accepting our invitation. In advance, I want to say that I'm a fan of your book. This is the old book with your name, and this is the newest version.
Oh, very good, very good. It's nice to see the
I use all your concepts in the MBA classes.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's true. First of all, Mr. Calkins, tell us about the Kellogg online branding course. Is it an online course? Is it possible for Brazilian students?
So we have at Kellogg, we have lots of courses, and now in the pandemic, more and more of them have gone online. So now for our branding program, we do it in 3 different ways. So we have a version that is a 3-week program that is online, and it is synchronous though. So it's real instructors meeting with students 3 times a week over a 3-week period. That's a really neat program. We do a simulation exercise. That's really neat. We then have an asynchronous online program, which has some webinars as part of it as well. But that is one, again, that people can watch and do over a 6-week period, a slightly different format. And then someday we'll be back to doing in-person programs here at
Okay.
When that will be, but hopefully soon.
Hoping for the vaccine. Hoping for that.
Waiting for the vaccine, and hopefully we'll.
And the online course is a free-week program.
So there's 2 different versions. There's a 3-week version, which has a lot of synchronous instruction and a lot of different instructors. And then we have another program we do with Emeritus, which is a 6-week online program. Okay. So there's 2 different formats for it. Yeah.
Okay. Let's start with the tough questions. Okay. The world has changed a lot. Every day more and more, because technology, because the pandemic, because the social media, and a lot of things. The business environment has become more and more digital. Anytime, anywhere, and on the channel become the standard of all of the things. In your opinion, in this new environment, what is the role of the branding?
Well, in this new world, and my gosh, how fast it's changed, I think branding is actually more important than ever, because the challenges there's so much clutter in the world right now. And the question is, how do you break through that? How do you really stand out? And I think brands are so important because they help us break through the clutter. You know, when you go online and you search on something or you get on social media, there's so much out there that a brand can really help you simplify things and can help cut through the clutter. The other piece that I think is really important right now is that trust is such a scarce commodity in the world right now. People don't know what to trust. It's fake news. And the one thing people do tend to trust, though, is they trust brands. And if there's a brand that you know and believe in and have experience with, people trust that brand. And that creates a huge amount of value. And I think that's going to be more and more important as time goes on.
I love it here. It simplifies things, avoid the commoditization, because if you are a superior brand, you have a premium price, and trust. In this age, trust is essential. I love to hear that.
Yeah, I think it really is true. And you know, the thing that I think so many companies are struggling with right now is how really do you protect your differentiation? When you get online and there's all these different brands, you know, the one thing that's changed for sure is that it's easier for little brands to enter some of these markets because you can go on and start buying ads on Facebook pretty easily. And all of a sudden you're out there and in the mix. And I think branding is one of these things that really insulates companies and protects them, you know, because you're looking at, well, what's the options here? And when there's a brand that we know and we can rely on and we trust, then there's differentiation and there's value and there's an opportunity to really make some margin and make some profits.
Okay. The second question. Many people asked me a simple question. The difference. Branding is the soul of the marketing, and the marketing is done with branding. Is there a borderline, a frontier of what is the responsibility of the brand manager and the responsibility of the marketing manager? Or as we say in Brazil, it's all mixed it together?
I tend to put together product managers and brand managers, and I tend to think of them in a similar way. And I think ultimately you want the whole team, you know, the whole company to understand what the brand stands for, understand how it adds value, understand what it means for customers, and to work together to support that and to build it. And I think that really is so very, very important now. Maybe more so now than ever, because, you know, there's so many points of contact and ways people interact with, and so many individuals. You know, the other thing that I think is interesting now is individuals who work for a brand and work on the brand team, they actually have a big impact on shaping the brand perceptions. And so you really need everyone to know, what does this brand stand for? How do we want people to act? How do we support the brand? Because all of that, when it's working together, is really, really powerful.
Or in other words, we have to avoid to think in silos, in boxes, and thinking together. All people in different sectors building the experience of a brand.
I think that's so important because, you know, really everything touches the brand. I mean, it is the product. So it's the R&D group and it's the manufacturing team, but it's how the product shows up in front of consumers. So that might be the sales team, or that might be the e-commerce team. It is certainly going to be the social media team. It's the HR team. How do we make sure we're bringing in the right people? And when we go to market, how do we make sure we're sending the consistent message? Yeah, so I think breaking down the silos is incredibly important because it's very hard to build a great brand if you're just stuck in that one communication silo. It's not enough anymore to really solidify the brand in the market.
But I was thinking, and for example, using my experience, I think that's just 40% of the companies that I know thinking all together. The others, you have a responsible for marketing, you have a responsible for sales, and they work completely alone. They completely separated it. Just 34% of the companies think in a broader sense.
It's not easy. Yeah, it's not easy to get everybody working together because everybody has different interests sometimes.
Different goals, sometimes different goals.
Exactly. And if I'm on the sales team, I really want to hit my sales numbers. And if I'm on the operations team, I want to hit my operations numbers. It takes, I think, strong leadership and brand focused leadership to really get people working together and pull in to build that brand and to make sure the brand is as strong as possible in the market.
Okay. Next questions. Companies today, because of their survival, put focus on the short term. Okay. To what extent is it good or bad for the brands when the company put all their focus in the short term? Because as you write in your book, brands is a long-term project, a long-term construction. What's this conflict between the short term of the business and the long terms of the brands?
I think it's one of the hardest things when it comes to building a brand is to really navigate the short-term versus long-term trade-off. And in many cases, it is a trade-off because when we invest for the long term, that sometimes costs us in the short term. And so you give up something in the short term to really build for the long term. So that tension, I think, is very much there. And I think it's something companies have to be really careful about, because if you give people the opportunity to just focus on the short term, they might do that. One of the things in companies that you see happen a lot is there's a big incentive. There's a big bonus. There's a big something to hit your short-term number. And then what happens is all the managers go after it. But in the process of doing that, they trade off the long term. So they discount things, or maybe they save money. They do cost cutting. They cut the advertising. They cut all the things that are really important for the long run in order to support the short run. So it's a balance. It's a balance. It's easy for me to say worry about the long run because I'm not managing a P&L day to day. So it's easy. I think really the challenge is that you really have to balance both. And you want to be really careful that the short run isn't becoming too important in your organization. Okay.
Very clear. Very clear. We live in an era of small companies, small ventures. Developing a branded product is often a relevant investment. If you fulfill all the phases, it's a relevant investment. How to do branding for small companies, for small owners, small entrepreneurs?
So I think small companies sometimes struggle a lot with branding, I think. And I think there's maybe two pitfalls. One is that sometimes I see small companies and they think that branding is really expensive. And so they say, we can't worry about that because we can't hire a big agency and we can't do big advertising campaigns. And so we're just not going to worry about branding. I think that's it's so incorrect, though, because in truth, companies are out there building brands all the time. Everything you do is shaping your brand. And you don't have to hire, huge companies to do your branding work. You can do branding very inexpensively. A lot of the key concepts when it comes to branding, they're not that complex. It's all about understanding what we stand for, really making sure we bring that to life for customers. It doesn't take a ton of money to get started on it. You don't need to hire huge firms to do this for you. So that's the first thing. I think companies sometimes say we can't. I think they can. The other thing I see with small companies is very often a small company will say, you know what, we are going to do everything. And they try to do too much. And there's so much pressure to get revenue and to get things going that the company sort of goes everywhere. I think for small companies, what's really important is to keep focused. If you don't have a huge company, if you don't have a lot of resources, the best thing you can do is to really focus on your key opportunities. Figure out what the brand stands for. Be that.
The value proposition. The value proposition.
The value, right. The value really, you want to understand what is your value proposition and then be really disciplined about staying with it and sticking to it. Because that's the way you can really optimize what you're going to get in terms of impact in the market.
Okay. Okay. Next question. Environment, social governance, diversity, sustainability. What's the challenge of traditional brands, brick and mortar companies, to become sustainable brands?
Well, I think there's no question that sustainability is really important all over the world. And it only seems to be becoming more important as time goes by. And I think we will see that is that, you know, as the environmental issues become more significant, I think you're going to see more and more attention to some of these concerns about sustainability. But also you're going to see concerns about how companies act more broadly. How do they work with different types of people? How do they play a role in society? So I think really there's two questions, I think, to wrestle with for companies. The first question is, are we doing enough? And do we have to do more? And I think for lots of companies, they need to do more. It takes effort, though, and it takes money and investment. But it's really important to put the money there to make sure you're getting traction on it. The second question is trickier, though. The second question is, how much should we talk about it in our advertising and in our communication? That one to me is more complicated. I think it's very tempting.
It's a thin line to talk about.
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think for a lot of companies, you know, they should be doing all the sustainability things and working with people and diversity and all of these really important practices. But for many of them, you know, that's not going to drive purchase of the product. And as a result, maybe that should not be the focus of the advertising or the focus of the communication. You know, I think there's two separate questions. Should we do it? I think yes. Almost every company has to be thinking about it. Every brand has to be thinking about it. Should we really talk about it in public? Different question. That one I think is less clear and requires some real thought. You know, because ultimately, if every company is talking about it, it doesn't really differentiate you. And so it's not going to add an enormous amount of value in the market. It won't drive purchases, right? So I think that's the part to think about.
Okay, but I see lots of studies, and mainly the millennials, they are putting their preference for sustainable brands. They are saying for the traditional companies, or you change, or I will not use your brands. So it's more than a trend. It's a need. Need.
And I think for companies, the question to look at is, what do our customers, what are they prioritizing right now? And if you've got a category that is selling to young people, that is selling to people who are very environmentally aware, then that's easy. You've got to be out there and you've got to make sure that you're not disadvantaged versus the competitors. There's always two questions though. One is you try to figure out what's the givens. You go back to the value proposition. Like, what's your frame of reference? What does everybody in the category have? And then the question is, what makes you different and special? I think for a lot of established brands, the challenge is, you can't have that as a problem. Sustainability, diversity, all of that has to be there, because otherwise it's going to be a problem and you're going to lose people. The trickier question is that where you can differentiate to lead? That requires more thought.
Yeah. Okay. In your opinion, is there a difference between branding for traditional companies, for branding for digital companies? This is other question that I face every class. Now that we have social digital brands, it's not necessary to learn about the branding for traditional company. And I say, but I want to hear from you. In my opinion, there is no difference. It's the same question in the past between branding for products and brand for services. But in your opinion, is there a difference for branding for traditional companies and digital companies?
I think the core concepts are very much the same. The challenges are the same. We need to have brand awareness. We need to be different. We need to create value. That's all the same. And the tools, a lot of the tools are the same. The value proposition, the positioning, brand design, all of that is I think, exactly the same. What is different is that some of the tactics will be different. For a digital, if it's a purely digital brand, well, you might have some different tactics than another company might use. But so the tactics might be different, but the core challenge is the same. The core frameworks are the same. The way brands work, the same. It really is just, what are you going to do to bring it to life tactically? So I think that's the difference. But fundamentally, I'm totally with you. I think it's very much the same in terms of the overall brand building process.
I love to hear that. And I always use an example. Think you have, as you said, you have a core methodology that's common for all of them. And you have a small toolbox. And at the toolbox, you use different tools for traditional or for digital brands. But the concept is the same.
Exactly right. Well, and it's just like every company needs to figure out what tools are going to work for their company in a given year. And I think that's always sort of the same, because the tools will be different. There's so many tools for us to use now in the world of marketing that we're going to use. Each company will use a different mix of tools and a different collection of tools. But the tasks, the fundamental task is still the same. And the way brands work is still exactly the same.
Okay. Next question. Netflix, Airbnb, Zoom, for example, we are using Zoom at this moment. Netflix, Airbnb, and Zoom, for example, become global brands, valuable brands if you use the interbrand metrics, for example, in a short space of time. Is there anything in common between these brands?
Oh, between these brands of Netflix, Airbnb,
and Zoom, for example.
And Zoom. Is there anything that's, well, I think what's interesting about all those brands is that they are very well defined. You go back.
Defined.
Well defined, right?
The value proposition. Again, the value proposition.
It's so clear. The value proposition is really tight for all of those brands. I mean, you look at Zoom, what really is Zoom as a value proposition? Well, it's very much focused on this digital video platform that lets us interact in a video context. And I think the focus of that is really good. Zoom is it's not a texting service. It's not a place where you interact with people in like a social media context. It's not a financial management thing. It is what it is. And I think that's the key. Likewise, Airbnb. Airbnb is very much, it is what it is, right? It's a place where you go for the two sides of it. If you have a piece of real estate that you want to get people to rent and to use, you go there. And if you're looking for a place, you go there. And that's what it is. And I think for that reason, all these brands are really similar in the crispness of their brand definition. And Netflix the same way. Netflix is Netflix. It's a place where you go for entertainment and to see great shows and to be entertained. It is what it is. That is one of the keys to building a great brand, though. You want to be really well defined, and you want to stand for something specific, and that's what all those brands have.
But for example, for Airbnb, I was thinking here, and you say this in your book, they make the evolution. At the first phase, they were functional brands, like any other portal. When you enter and click the best price option. The second phase was to become a community of people that love to have the experience to go abroad and feel like a hometown. So they make this evolution from the functional brands for emotional brands. Do you agree with that?
I think they have. I think they have. And they've gone even further. They were running ads that said we bring together the world. Or we're all about unifying people. And I think that is true. It's interesting. I think that's true to some extent. But I've got to tell you, I don't think people go to Airbnb because they unify the world. This very high order, no, I think people go to Airbnb because it's a great platform to find people to stay in your place. And it's a great place to go to find properties where you might want to stay in. So they're reaching on the brand, although I think the value there is still, I think, more about how well it works functionally with all the properties and all the services and all the reviews and all the travelers that are there. I think it's still more that ultimately than feeling great about the future of the world. That's one where I think sometimes you go so high with your brand that you're like, well, I guess, but I really just need a place to stay when I'm on vacation. That's really what I want. Okay. So I think there's a balance between the two.
Okay. Let's talk about social media. In terms of social media, companies are no longer more black box, but castles of glass, transparent, in which society observes everything, and it's possible to see and comment about the company, for good and for worse, for better and worse. How should brands position themselves in a social media? What's our voice tone? I have to be frequent. I have to be active, responsive. What is the best to handle with this new environment?
Yeah. So I think on social media, there's sort of a base level that every company needs to have. And then some companies should do more. So the base level, I think every company, every brand right now should be present on social media, should be looking at what people are saying, should be ready to respond to complaints and ready to try to deal with issues. And I think the idea of being present on social media is just really, really important for everybody right now. Because, if people are talking about your brand, good or bad, you want to be aware of it and you want to be part of that conversation. So that's a given, right? The part I think that varies is then how much beyond that do you want to go? And I think for some brands, it's really important to be out there, to have people following you, to be really proactive, to be part of the conversation, driving the conversation. I mean, if you're an entertainment property, or if you're a fashion brand, or if you're in hospitality, hotels and restaurants, and all of these things are really
it's a land full of insights for your brands, full of insights.
Exactly right. There's so many insights, and there's an opportunity to really pull in customers through all of that and get recommendations and all of that. Now, but there's other brands that I think you don't need to be out there all the time doing that. I mean, if I'm a brand of a shirt, I'm trying to sell just a regular business shirt, then I don't know if I need to be out there every minute getting out, some crazy thing on social, or if I'm trying to sell a railroad tie or something, a B2B kind of product, it's not really driven by social media. So I think what everybody needs to do is say, first, do we have the basics in place? And then we say, for our brand, given our customers and how our brand works and how our category works, how important should it be for us? And, but again, I think it varies a lot by the category and by the brand. Some brands, they really want to be out. I mean, you take a brand like Avellanos is just perfect for social media. I mean, you want to be out there. You want to be engaging with people. You want to get people thinking about your brand, and it's fun and it's perfect, but other brands, much less so.
Okay. In your opinion, what is the intersection between branding and storytelling?
So I think they're different, and yet I think storytelling is a really important part of branding. So storytelling broadly, right, is telling the story of, your company, the story of your life. I mean, there's all sorts of stories that we tell in the world. But what we know about stories is that stories really do resonate. People remember stories. It has an impact on people. You know, people have a lot of trouble remembering facts. People remember stories. And even you go back to olden days when people would pass down knowledge, they did it not by trying to remember facts. They did it through stories and remembering these stories. So I think stories are really important for humans more broadly, but I think stories are really important also for brands. And they're important both externally and internally. You know, externally, you want to tell the story of your brand for your customers, and you want to help them understand what is this brand about and where did it come from and what are some of the wonderful things that we do. And that's all very important for your customers. I think sometimes, though, storytelling is almost more important inside a company, because when you tell stories,
engage the employees.
Exactly right. You know, and you tell this wonderful story about, you know, an employee who did this incredibly good thing and took a risk to delight a customer. And those are things that really have an impact on people. And they help people understand the behaviors you're after and the values that your firm really believes in. So I think it's important to think about stories both externally and internally, because they resonate and they're important in both of those contexts.
Okay. We are going to the end. Brazil has brands that are well positioned in several markets, just such as Natura, for example, Beauty and Care, and Havaianas, flip-flop. Any advice for brands that want to launch in international markets? Any advice?
Expansion, right, is a huge opportunity for brands, but it's challenging. It is tough to do that. I think, you know, there's two challenges. One is there's a logistical challenge, which is purely getting access to a market and finding the way into the distribution network and all of that. And those are certainly, you can overcome those, but they're worth thinking about. The other thing, though, is that when you're going to go into a new market, you really need a clear strategy and you need a differentiated brand. So when you go in there, you really want to go in and have something that's different about you, that is different and is special. And if you're going to go in from one country, the question is, if you're going to try to leverage that, well, you go back to storytelling. What's the story that explains this brand, that explains where it came from and how it really works? And so I think you have to be very disciplined as you go from one country to the next country to the next country to really make sure that comes across. You know, one of the brands that's been interesting to watch for me has been this brand Uniqlo, which Uniqlo came out of Japan, and they've expanded. That brand is now expanded really globally, and they're going lots of different places.
I went to their store in New York. I went to their store.
You did?
Impressive. Yeah. It's impressive.
It's impressive, you know. But what's interesting is they really are. They're different, and they're unique, and they have a distinct value proposition, and they also sort of it resonates with the home country. So it came from Japan, started in Japan.
Yeah.
And as it goes to different parts of the world, it's clearly from Japan. I mean, it clearly is from that, but it fits, and it's part of what makes them unique. I mean, there's an emphasis on technology and function and design that is very much part of what Uniqlo stands for and part of the brand of Japan. And there's a match there that works really, really well.
Okay. In your opinion, is there a difference between brand management and reputation management?
Yeah, I think they're so similar. I tend to think of a brand very much as a reputation. You know, what's the brand? The brand are all the associations that people have. So all the things they think when they see your symbol or your brand name, or what's all the stuff that pops into their head. I think reputations work very much the same way. You know, reputation, when somebody sees you, what are all the things they think? And in a way, these two things operate so similarly that
they are interlinked.
Yeah, I think they're so linked that I use the words interchangeably. You know, some people I think find it easier to think about reputations than brands. You know, you say brand and people are like, oh, branding, that's so complicated. But you say reputation and people are like, oh, I understand what reputation is. And you're like, well, no, but it's sort of the same thing.
In the American books, the people that writes about reputation says that the reputation is what the people will tell when you are outside the door.
That's exactly right. Which is, though, I think that's sort of exactly how brands work too. But my goodness, when you think of it, it's really important. You know, I think personal branding is something that should be a priority for everybody. Because if you have a great personal brand, if you've got a great personal reputation, wonderful things are going to happen over time. You're going to get good opportunities. Your work's going to be perceived well. People will want to hang out with you. They're going to want to work with you. Really good stuff happens. If the brand is battered, if your reputation is sort of battered, very different experience.
Yeah, but I was thinking that there are strong brands with strong reputations, and there are strong brands with not so good reputations.
On that, I would say there's brands. It depends how you define a strong brand, right? To me, I would say this. I'd say there are brands that have high awareness. They are well-known, right? And some well-known brands have great reputations. They're great brands. Some well-known brands, you know, don't have great reputations. You know, like in our country right now, as we spit it, you know, we've got a president. And we have a president who has a lot of awareness, but I'm not sure you would say that's a great brand right now. You know, he's got a lot of issues at the moment. And that would be a brand you'd say high awareness, but low liking for a lot of people, but very polarizing brand, if nothing.
Okay. Okay. We are going to the end. What's the recommendation for Brazilian students who wants to pursue a career in branding? What's your recommendation? It's books, movies, culture in general. What's your recommendation for a young student?
Who wants to learn about branding and marketing and wants to get into that field? I would say two things. So the first thing I would say is that, you know, you need certain skills. So when I first went into marketing, you know, I was at Kraft Foods, Kraft Heinz now for many, many years. But when I went in there, somebody I was talking to was pretty savvy, and he was getting all these jobs. And so I said, how are you getting all these jobs? He says, well, I go in and I always talk about three things. And I talk about my team leadership skills, and I talk about my analytical skills, right? And then I talk about my initiative. And I talk about those three things. And I have to tell you, I think that's right. And I think it's still true. If you want to be successful in marketing, you really need to demonstrate those things. Team leadership, I think, is so important because it's so cross-functional and getting the team working together. So you've got to be able to lead a diverse group of individuals. Analytical skills, the numbers really do matter. And you've got to be able to work with the numbers. You've got to develop those skills. I think it's really, and then initiative. You know, the ability to get up and go and do things, I think, is also what people are looking for. So the first thing I would say is develop those skills. The second thing I would say is get some experience in the digital space. And you can do it in lots of different ways. You know, you can go volunteer for an organization.
Yeah.
Volunteer to do a study. You know, you go to anybody and you say, hey, you know what, can I just study your social media presence and come up with some recommendations for you, right? Can I just do that for free? Would you let me do that? You know, people will say, sure. I mean, who's going to turn that down? But what happens then is by doing that, when you get into an interview, you can talk about it. You can say, I did this great project. It was so interesting. We came up with all these, and they're going to be like, wow, that's awesome. And then you've gotten some real experience that you can talk about, and that's going to help you in the long run. So I would say get that experience, especially in the digital space. That's what companies are going to be looking for. And that's what people who are currently there aren't as strong in. And that's a space, that's the entry point for a lot of young people.
Okay. It was not in our original script, but any predictions for brandings in 2021, they are going more and more digital. They are going to be more engagements. They are going to be more sustainable brands. Any predictions, the way that we are paved in the future for the brands?
Yeah. So in 2021, I think we will see, we'll see a continued shift to digital. We're going to see a continued emphasis on bringing brands to life in a digital space that's there. So I think we're going to see those trends continue. The one thing that I think we're going to see that maybe is a little different is that I think some of the big established brands are getting stronger and stronger now. Over the past decade, we've had lots of little brands have popped up and they found a way into these markets. And it's been an amazing thing to watch. I think what's happening now is the big brands, they've made.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Big established brands.
Okay. Big established.
And I think it's going to be a lot of momentum to the big established brands right now because they've gotten better. Everybody realizes they've got to be successful in the digital space. I think you're going to see some big brands, become even stronger and maybe rebound more in the year ahead.
Okay. Mr. Calkins, it was a pleasure to have you here in our web series, Bora Falar de Branding. The Brazilian communities of studies that loves brands. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
This was really fun to be a part of, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Okay, thank you.